Welcome. I'm Maggie Hendry, Chair of Graduate Media Design Practices, and our thesis students are among the most ingenious, dedicated, and unique creatives. But few people were equipped for this last year, and they have shown creativity and resilience. To say that they and their faculty have reimagined every facet of thesis work, collaboration, and presentation is a real understatement. Their work spans technologies.
I'm Maggie Hendry, Chair of Graduate
in
Media
AI,
Design Practices,
virtual reality,
and our
sensing
are among the
environment.
most ingenious, dedicated, and unique creatives. But few people were equipped for this last year, and they have shown creativity and resilience. To say that they and their faculty have reimagined every facet of thesis work, collaboration, and presentation is a real understatement. Their work spans technologies. I'm Maggie Hendry, Chair of Graduate
in AI, virtual reality,
and our sensing are among the most ingenious, dedicated.
We seem to be in some kind of audio.
When in doubt, mute and come on back to it.
It's really fun to be talking about how ingenious and dedicated our students and faculty are when some of our production has these glitches. And I think this year's really been about leaning into the glitch, right? So thank you for your patience. And I think what I really wanted to say is that as our student work spans everything from AI to virtual reality or sensing and built environment, that their critical and creative drive is rooted in the diverse relationships, civil society, and the environment that we all share. So whilst we're all here to talk about the work, we're also here to celebrate our graduating students, their advisors, and all their faculty and friends. So a huge and heartfelt thanks and congratulations.
I don't see you.
Welcome to Thesis Live, the showcase of media design practices MFA candidates for 2021. I'm Tim Durfee.
I'm Ann Burdick.
I'm Elise Coe. For the next couple of hours, we'll see 13 projects and hear responses from our featured guest respondents, Emily Smith and Stuart Candy.
We view this event as the welcoming of our graduating students into the larger design community. So for those of you who have joined us on Zoom, we encourage your participation in an open conversation at the end of the program.
Ann, Tim, and I will be your hosts for today, but before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the hard work of other members of the faculty and staff who directly worked with the Thesis group this year.
MDP Chair Maggie Hendry, MDP Director Kevin Wingate, Elizabeth Chin and Sam Creeley, who taught critical practices this year, Sean Donahue and Ben Hooker, leaders for this year's Thesis Grad Lab, and many forms of critical and technical support from Casey Anderson, Jenny Rodenhouse, and Benjamin Borden.
Central to the MDP thesis process is the opportunity for thesis students to have regular consultation with the diverse cohort of disciplinary experts and superstars that make up our extended thesis committee. Claire Evans, Umi Su, Norman Klein, Jesse Chris, Mike Milley, Richard Wheeler, and Minnie Zeiger.
Finally, our thanks to Jennifer Ryder for the fantastic graphic design for Thesis Live.
So we're about to start the presentations. The format is that each student will present their work for 4 minutes, followed by a short transition interlude where we hosts will be reading some of the commentary from chat. So please, those of us joining on Zoom, please be dropping your thoughts in there. At 2 points during this process, our guest respondents will join us with additional reflections on the work so far. At the end, we'll open the channels up to any of our audience to ask questions of the students about their work.
But first, let's say hi to our graduating students. I'm going to invite everybody to turn on your video and show yourselves. Hello. All right.
All right.
First up, we have Stella, Sizhe, Huang, and let's get going.
Hi everyone, my name is Stella. My thesis drop houses exploring the physical implications of our digital lives.
Episode 1, Cloud House. In the Cloud House, spaces visible in the backgrounds of online video meetings merge to form AR clouds. These accumulate and occupy the house as phantoms of our online lives.
Microscope. If we're not aware of those pieces, we can unpack the standard all day. We can develop great learning targets. We can even come up with a great product. But guess what? You put it in front of the kids and
ended up having some negative consequences, then you will not continue to respond.
Timestamps in the description box if you want to skip to certain features.
Episode 2, On House. Objects, spaces, and even people in the On House are modified to coexist with constant live streaming. The redesigned spaces and loungewear not only enable elective privacy, but formally reflect the contradiction between integrating and separating digital and physical life.
To that particular stimulus, if your response ended up having some negative consequences, then you will not continue to respond the same way to that particular stimulus. and they are classical conditioning and operant conditioning, which we will talk about. Two very different kinds of behavioral learning. Social learning is watching other people have something happen to them and learning from the fact that they had that thing happen to them. So if you see somebody that does something and some positive event occurs because of it, then you're going to repeat that event as well in your life. If you see somebody do something and it's a negative event, you're going to not do that particular thing.
Episode 3, Content Factory. The Content Factory is structured around an infrastructure of live streaming, positioning real-life activities in parallel, embracing the contemporary hybrid prismatic self in the most fundamental expression of the domestic.
Love using this on my top and lower lashes, but I will say lower lashes for an everyday look can sometimes be risky.
Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to cook chocolate brownie.
Episode 4, House of Influencers. The House of Influencers is optimized for the super influencer. It is nomadic, allowing glamorous and exotic settings, and its form is comprised of conical studio rooms, ideal for fashioning the ideal post.
Thanks for visiting Drop Houses, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, Stella, for such a provocative project. A couple of comments from the chat. Emoticon smiley face from Kevin Wingate. High accolades there. Anne Burdick asks, how might these needs change post-COVID? And Elise Coe, myself, asks, interesting how or whether chroma key green is instantly recognizable as a surface meant to be replaced. So some thoughts to potentially save for later and circle back to later in our open discussion. Again, encourage everyone to drop comments big and small in the chat. But for now, next up we have Yuwen Lin.
Hello, I'm Yuwen. I'm going to present my thesis project, Neometabolism.
Neo-metabolism speculates that under the lifestyle of extreme digital dependence in the future, how the base and social activity transform into another shared mode. In the urban dwelling, personal spaces are assembled from modules which are functionally various and structurally independent. No longer restricted to the fixed area, they can be shared flexibly through app reservation and autonomously delivered when needed. The modularity also empowers public infrastructures to generate ever-changing forms. Any change in iteration will be planned according to orders received from the digital platform. Citizens may browse the published activities online, submit applications for participation if interested, or pay the visit on demand. It has driven a new industry for space maintenance, assembly, and customization, where the modules are distributed and recycled from to maintain the continuous functioning of every part in the city.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Yuwen. We have some comments coming in here. From Mike Milley, fascinating to see physical spaces and objects given the affordances of digital spaces. Norman Klein comments here, is this meant entirely as a utopian space or a kind of dystopic, ironic, or modest space, or dystopic irony? And I think that coexistence of dystopic and utopic is very familiar to us with a lot of the sharing economy scenarios. Sean Donahue, I wonder what excess looks like in this world. Maxim says, whatever will happen to urban planning? Norman also, actually Elise says, wonder what home feels like in this new world. Lots of questions here. Thank you so much, Yuwen. We also have a question or a comment from Mimi Zeiger, excess or even waste. An interesting paradox with this project that in some ways it's hyper efficient, but possibly creating a new form of excess. Thank you so much, Yuwen. Next up, we have Evan Stalker.
Hi, I'm Evan Stalker, and my thesis work ultimately took the form of a virtual space that multiple people could connect to and chat within. To give you a better sense of the way it works, I'll introduce it with this video. My thesis culminated in building a virtual chat room in the form of a kitchen, asking how this function of the space has been uniquely salient in queer domestic history, where reconceptualizing the intimacies and rhythms of kinship is a central concern. It proposes that games provide a paradigm for a critical, relational, and reflective use of space to explore cultural norms. When they join the game, users are assigned either a host or guest role. Guests begin in the dining room and hosts in the kitchen, replicating a custom by which household divisions create rules about intimacy. To have a conversation, users assigned as guests have to migrate from the dining room into the kitchen. The kitchen presents its own set of cooking activities that appear as a game, providing explicit goals for what users should do in the space. UI elements encourage users to go from station to station and make food to carry out into the dining room. A large timer provides an overall time constraint. The game invites play with both winning and losing states. If they have any sort of conversation, users will almost certainly fail to complete tasks on time. Users are thus put into an ambivalent and somewhat conflicted relationship with the space's rules, and thus their cultural meaning. To maintain audio chat volume while cooking and complete tasks more quickly, players can move pieces of the kitchen around. As they intervene in the space's design, they reveal images and objects from documentaries about queer cooking spaces. The dynamics of the game's chat system allows users to explore a contrasting temporality. Unlike games where audio conversation effortlessly happens in parallel to game events, users are audible to each other only while they look at each other and stay within a certain distance. A system of tones fading in and out also helps players orient themselves to each other. These constraints frame conversation with a feeling of presence conveyed through spatial awareness, sound, and interaction. The interactive aspects of the space ultimately become objects of conversation as much as ways to channel other interactions. Here are a few clips from
rearranged like your kitchen, and like, I mean, it's like, not to be like cliche, but you're like putting like these memories and stuff like on shelves, like reorganizing them, and like every time you like kind of like pivot or shift it, you like, you know, the graphics here, irrespective of like the audio or not, like kind of like the tactile element and the element of like it being part of like the fabric of space is like kind of nice, because you like, you pick it up and you sort of inspect it, and it recalls like some aspect of history or memory or whatever it is. Yeah, and then you might get like lots of options. Okay. Where did the tomatoes go?
It's been a really interesting project, and I'd love to see how the space gets cut up and the conversations that happen within it. Thanks so much for coming by and checking out the work. That's all from me.
Thanks so much, Evan. Just looking at the conversation going on in the chat, Umi chimes in, the queerness of ever-shifting modularity. And I think that really builds off of a comment that I saw asking about the relationship between the sort of kludged kitchens that result from this game or this activity and the historical ones. We also have a question here. What is the aesthetic of the avatar? Some kudos from Maggie. Interesting game logic with non-planned kitchen life. Someone else asking or noting that the gameplay action in an otherwise mundane space is fascinating. And I thought or think it's really exciting to hear the conversations and get to eavesdrop a little bit on yeah, things that have actually been instigated by our project. So great prototyping, Evan. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to Yiran Zhang.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yiran. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a new way to express negative emotions. Upper Visage is an active emotion expression system that amplifies facial expressions of negative emotions. I'm so obsessed with studying people's facial expression and the metaphorical messages a certain facial expression conveys. People have used various techniques to study, analyze, and control facial expressions for a long time. Whether it is the Asian facial totems, masks, or the modern AI emotion analysis and deep learning facial recognition system. Nietzsche said, every profound spirit needs a mask. Facial expression is a mask that changes depending on the audience and the variety of social interactions. In Eastern or collectivist culture, where it's a harmonious and inclusive at their core value system, most people claim for themselves as politeness, respect, and friendly. seldom show their negative emotion or say ugly feelings. I wonder why and want to challenge the social value system that now inhibits people from expressing negative emotions. The project Upper Visage allows people to articulate negative emotions, communicate to others of their ugly feelings, and normalize them to communication, and also complicate the subtle moments of socialized human life with language machine. Next, Alana will walk you through more details about Upper Visage.
Hey, Alana, sorry to interrupt, but we're not hearing your audio.
Oh, there's no sound. I'm gonna stop share and reshare again.
Hey, what's up? I'm Ilana. We all have our facial expressions. Today we'll try together with the new negative emotion
Ilana,
facial
you're
expression
showing
technique.
you're at wrong
Let's
screen.
go for the opera visit. Everything starts with the brain. Emotional responses all belong to advanced functions of the central nervous system, which is called amygdala neurons. Amygdala neurons signal a decision made about a face such as
Sorry, I had to do that, Alana. We weren't seeing your video. We were
Wait,
seeing
sorry.
No
I
problem.
need to reshare it again.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
What's up? I'm Ilana. We all have our facial expressions. Today we'll try together with the new negative emotion facial expression technique. Let's go for the opera visit. Everything starts with the brain. Emotional responses all belong to advanced functions of the central nervous system, which is called amygdala neurons. Amygdala neurons signal a decision made about a face, such as which emotion it shows. Wait, you said there's something forbidden you show negative emotion with your physical face? No problem, pick up an opera visage mask that can represent or camouflage your emotion. Be careful, here, we only have negative emotions masks. Make sure you chose the right one. Okay, let's have a look at how others using opera visage. Thank you. See you soon on visageopera.design. Bye tilde.
So by proposing new ways of expressing negative emotions, Upper Visage challenges the status quo and asks questions about nature of indirect versus direct communication. Thank you.
Hey, it's Alana again.
Don't forget, go to operavisage.design. It's operavisage.design. Okay, I have to go. Bye. Hey.
Thank you, Alana. Just reading from some of the comments here, Mike Milley says, I'm living for this clash of classic aesthetics from the opera and hyper-modern digital ones. Anne Burdick says, I'd love to see those masks in everyday use. Norman Klein says the masks are cinematically amazing, which is totally true. Elise chiming in also, the masks themselves are so interesting. They seem to juxtapose conflicting elements in a way that avoids simple reading. Excellent work, Alana. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Aishwarya Janwadkar.
Aishwarya, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, good.
Hi, my name is Aishwarya, and this is a preview of my project, Negentropic Landscapes, including end of life in the design of living communities. Welcome to Negentropic Landscapes. The design of this landscape is informed by community maps co-created by experts in death care. There are two insights in particular that are prevalent in this model: the adjacencies of organized spaces and the use of nodes and paths as elements to order the community.
There are hospices that are for-profit. People need to be very wary of them.
Entropy is defined as a degree of disorder. Negentropy is defined as the quantity of information that enables the structuring of physical systems by evacuating their entropy. Entropy increases without limit in a closed system. In that sense, when our health systems become closed, there is destruction of knowledge. When our healthcare systems are open, they return to knowledge, which is negentropic. Negentropy in this project suggests that collective knowledge and organizing could manage the entropy of our healthcare system. In negentropic landscapes, structures serve to both practically and symbolically deal with the processes of dying. They are designed not to confine people's choices in the name of safety, but to expand them in the name of living a worthwhile life. In this community, there are several nodes where heightened activity and interactions happen. A central river flows through the neighborhood and arranges action and movement between the nodes. Every person in the community has a role to play in the maintenance of the landscape. Older adults tend the gardens and help children maintain the nurseries. Care homes are designed in opposition to the traditional nursing homes. Here, artists, students, and seniors live together. Land around the care homes, in proximity to the gardens, is utilized for burial pods, which get repurposed as compost.
The preventative asset component to hospice and palliative care is, I think, the most important, because the sooner that you can have those conversations would be beneficial. Giving them that knowledge and tools now, setting them up for a more positive experience.
High school students use the clay from the river to make cremation urns. This contribution builds a sense of empathy and cultivates positive associations to death. The schematic of the prayer house moves from social to solitary. The social space allows for communal healing, while the solitary space provides support for letting go. This space aids the residents in anticipating and acclimating to death as part of life. Death parlors are designed to provide advanced death planning resources. The design of the space itself is welcoming and encourages residents to practice preparatory care.
For a long time, childbirth was very medicalized, but then there was a movement in the 60s and 70s, and it was a cultural revolution of people reclaiming the natural process of birth. You know, we haven't necessarily have that in the end of life.
Crematory care ensures that the departed's body is handled with solemnity during the cremation. The cremation begins with dead doulas and the family washing the body together in a bath surrounded by open space, high ceilings, and the deceased's favorite music playing in the background. Bodies are then escorted into the crematory. Water from the bath is directed to the plants. Grief care is the green space that circles the cemetery. Here, families can wait and reflect on their feelings while their loved ones get cremated. After the cremation, the space also allows families to perform their own culturally relevant rituals and ceremonies to say goodbye to their loved ones.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Aishwarya. We've got some notes here from Sean, really appreciating the attention that you've paid to the sounds of this space. Mimi also complimenting you on the research interwoven with the overall design. And Umi says, the multi-generational engagement of death and life at once is very moving. Norman chiming in, entropy is hugely powerful as a model going back to cybernetics, Levi Strauss, Robert Smithson, Pynchon, and an endless range of theorists, etc. It seems to belong to the loss of agency in the Cold War era, and then afterward, and theory of decentered spaces as more than decay, more like a Big Bang kind of inevitable change. Indeed, the passage after death fits into that as well. I can't read it in Norman's voice, but I'm hearing it in Norman's voice. So thanks for that, Norman. And Mike Milley saying, you've done a great job of considering the aesthetics of this experience. I wonder if there's a similar semantic exploration that would further your work, for instance, using the term bodies. Some emphasis on that, on the multi-generation. With that, let's move on to Keda Jiang.
Hi, my name is Keda, and my thesis project is called Cloud Seeds, a social media network that amplifies the sense of community and interpersonal connections.
Welcome to Cloud Seeds. Cloud Seeds is a social platform that creates stronger communities by rewarding care and responsibility and enabling both online and real-world spontaneous meetups. For this network, the user maintains a living plant to serve as their +1 on the platform. To sign up, the optical biometrics of the plant serves as the login. Because of this constraint, each member has to work hard to keep their plants alive and thriving to maintain the access to the community. A map of other users appear on the Cloud Seeds main page, with the most active users' plant profiles appearing the brightest. The visibility of the plant profile decays over time if no update about this plant is posted. This encourages active contribution among the members in the community to keep the virtual community garden alive. When enough active participants appear on Cloud Seeds heat map, the server will prompt a triangular pattern on the heat map for users to sign up for the in-person meetup. When the participants for the physical event are confirmed, the pattern, with one triangle per user, serves as the template for material to be laser cut. Delivered to the designated location and inflated to form a dome where the community of individual plants and their owners can come together for a spontaneous, temporary garden. Cloud Seeds emphasizes on community development on both online and offline scenarios. As the members work hard to keep their plants alive and posting plant updates on the platform, their participation also keeps the community alive in both virtual and physical sense. United by this shared form of domestic stewardship, the users of Cloud Seeds participate in a more intentional mode than typical social networks. Thanks for watching. See you in the meetups.
Thank you for watching.
Semi-muted. I know. Thank you very much. Classic. Pasadena Meetup, shouts Sean from the internet, and chimes in, how does plant care extend our understanding of interspecies relationships? Elise is ready to meet up as well, but her plants are sadly deceased. And I hear there are chats coming in on the YouTube channel, so everyone can check in on those as well. Could this extend to a garden, asks Maggie, or a multi-plant of some sort? Great, well, thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Keda. Next up, we have Maya Friedman.
Okay. I'm gonna present live so everyone can hear my voice. Hi, my name is Maya Friedman, and welcome to the final presentation of my thesis, Toxic Love, Time Femme Futures. I started my thesis from reflecting on how the majority of women's healthcare design, both speculative and practical, focuses on the redesign of artifacts and objects of gynecology that are solely biomedical and individualistic. Some of these are speculums, period tracking apps, and breast pumps, for example. So with this context in mind, the goal that I kept coming back to in my thesis was to propose an alternative to current women's health design by moving beyond the biomedical body with a method that considers the body's entanglement with environmental and social factors that affect gynecological health. So what did I actually make? My thesis consists of 3 parts. The first on the left is Toxic Love, which is a fictional clothing line which has 2 garments called collective protective gear, a new form of PPE that is made for cosmetologists who are at risk for gynecological harm as a result of workplace hazards. The second piece is Femme Futures, which is a podcast about alternative futures for women's healthcare. In this podcast, design projects are talked about that are not for public consumption, but propose a new way to approach women's healthcare design. And the third piece is an episode about the Toxic Love garments on the Femme Futures podcast. So I'd first like to talk about the fictional clothing line called Toxic Love. The first garment in the Toxic Love line is the Toxic Trio collar. This is a chemical tracking neck collar. When the collar detects levels of toxicity that reach an unsafe threshold for the female body, the device alerts not just the wearer with a red light, but all of the women wearing the collars so they can collectively work to reduce exposure for an individual at a certain period of time. The second item is the filtration underwear, which is a one-piece made up of a respirator mask with a personal filtration system that is attached to a pair of underwear. It is one piece to represent the relationship between air toxicity in salons and extreme gynecological irregularities. The second piece of my thesis, as I said earlier, is a podcast called Femme Futures. I imagine Femme Futures to be a new method for taking the practice of design fiction into a public arena and creating community by extending the fiction to a larger audience who help generate, rewrite, and expand on elements of the narrative. Each episode of this podcast will follow a similar guest and narrative structure. In the first episode on Toxic Love, I discuss the garments in conversation with 4 women who are directly impacted by this project: a hair colorist, a toxins educator, a clothing designer, and a museum curator. And I'm gonna play a snippet from the podcast, although I think I did my audio wrong, so let's see if it works.
Well, I am a woman living in LA. All we do is talk about fantasy life, fantasy objects.
Hey y'all, this is Maya, and welcome to episode 1 of Femme Futures, a podcast where we have very real discussions about possible futures for women's healthcare.
My name is Sarah Kahn.
My name is Laura Adler.
My name is Michelle Mellon-Fisher.
My name is Sparrow Fox.
On today's episode, we're talking about the design project Toxic Love. To start off the conversation, I shared with all 4 women the 2 clothing items from the Toxic Love line, the Toxic Trio collar and the Filtration underwear.
I love the collar. It gives me RBG vibes, which helps me feel even more protected.
The aesthetic is cool. It's kind of punk rock.
I think especially if you're looking at like how hairstylists tend to be really creative and use their exterior for their self-expression. I think that this speaks to my people.
So it's an interesting space, as you say, one that is often framed in terms of self-care for the client rather than care for the worker.
Well, I am a woman living in LA.
So I actually do have 2 more episodes of this podcast coming. And so if you're interested, the next one will be released this summer. And just to close out, to reiterate, how does my work answer this big question that I started with? So creating a method of design that considers sort of the intersectional and external factors that affect women's health beyond the biomedical body. So first, the Toxic Love garments connect gynecological health to an external social context, the salon. Second, the functionality of the objects propose a method of design that benefits the health of the collective, not just the individual. And finally, the podcast Femme Futures proposes a replicable feminist method for practicing design fiction that privileges the voices of non-medical experts on women's health. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maya. Umi is really into the nomenclature in your project and maybe is being inspired about some potential song titles there. And then Maggie and I were chatting a little bit in the sidebar just about the, with that idea of nomenclature, just the term PPE kind of entering the general lexicon now. And Maggie pointed out that even this idea of collective health coming from personal protection or vice versa is really something that hopefully we've understood or come to grips with a bit more now. Norman Klein chiming in to say that it reminds him of the crazy spa treatments from the Victorian period. I want to hand it over now to Anne. We've sort of been through the first half of our presentations, and so she's going to introduce our respondents.
Hi, so today we are very lucky to be joined by 2 amazing respondents, if remotely and asynchronously, since we are taking advantage of the web-based aspect of this. And we've hit up a couple of people who live in different time zones. And so they've given us video responses to the students' work. Our first respondent is Emily Smith. She's an educator, designer, and exhibition maker based in Berlin. She's currently professor and program head of MA Media Spaces at the University of Europe Applied Sciences in Berlin. Emily's cross-disciplinary practice engages ethnographic, improvisational, choreographic, and participatory frameworks, and includes recent work as the co-artistic director of the FICRA Graphic Design Biennial. She was co-producer of the experimental online series Present with Prem Krishnamurti and running the independent project space K20A in Berlin. In February 2020, she was selected as one of the inaugural artists in residence at the Museum Sush in Switzerland, which resulted in Conversations with Spark, an interview with an AI bot. Emily holds an MA in visual and media anthropology from the Free University Berlin, a BFA in graphic design and time-based media from Art Center College of Design, and a BA in Latin American Studies from Pritzker College. So now I am going to share my screen And I am going to play for you Emily's video.
No sound.
Got it. Sorry about that. One more time. We are good. We'll start Emily over again.
Hi, thank you so much for the invitation, and I assume the introduction. I'm not sure how much I was introduced, but maybe I can give you guys a little bit of a position.
Apologies for technical difficulties. One moment, please.
We are leaning into the glitch, leaning into the glitch.
There we go. Now we got it. Okay. Now we're good.
So without sort of focusing too much on medium, I think some of the questions that I've been asking in the last 4 or 5 years is how can design really expand the way we move through the world, the way we care for each other, what is the relationship of our body to design, what is bodies in general. I think there's a ethnographic and a choreographic and participatory focus that I bring to a lot of the works and the way I look at works as we move forward. So let's do this. So you guys are in for a treat. I have made diagrams for each of you, but you can't see them. So I'm going to have to send them forward to Art Center where they can be distributed. But those are my gift to you in the way that now is a moment to give. So I'd like to start with Stella's project, Drop Houses. What a world to get thrown into first and foremost. I feel like I was invited to the set of a TV series, and it was for me something kind of The Circle meets Dark Mirror, Black Mirror meets MTV, Real World. That this acceleration, it's just like it's a house of overload, and overload in many different ways. And it's an interesting proposal that I think is extremely relevant with where we are right now. I think we are trying to navigate our home as being a place of harmony and togetherness and maybe like a respite. But you've really collapsed this personal with the public in a way that I find both dystopian, but also oddly celebratory. The one image that I've really taken away from your project is this invisibility cloak that I'm able to hide in my own home. And somehow I live with others, but I have to navigate their daily life physically and visually. And this really resonates, I think, living with 4 people, 3 other people, and through the last year, having to actually navigate my private sphere as these things are being kind of tunneled in from outside in the world. Secondly, neo-metabolism from Yuwen. I have an illustration here of squares upon squares upon squares. If I could animate it, it would grow and contract, and almost a mathematical engineered modular organism that I think has both optimistic, but also raises some questions that I want to address. And I think in the optimism is to imagine a future of a shift in our cultural behavior where we are able to share our domestic spaces is pretty fascinating. We tend to close our worlds up a little bit. So whose house becomes, moves from it's my home to our home. And it's interesting to project from there and think about how might that scenario actually affect the way communities grow around each other. A little bit what's missing for me is what are the social, cultural, class, environmental costs of such modularity and convenience. And on that note, I'd like to send you in 2 directions that might give you some food for thought. The British Pavilion in 2016 at the Venice Architectural Biennial has a proposal of 5 future homes, and interestingly, the financial models behind it, as well as a project from Christopher Colandrin Thomas in the 2016 Berlin Biennial called New Elam, which is a flexible global housing subscription that is based on collective ownership. And I think both of these have a really critical but also optimistic way of thinking about how do we respond to the housing crisis, how do we respond to the way that our spaces are either expanding, or until they don't stop, and where are the limits, or we're forced to contract. And perhaps there's something in between. Evan's project, Playing the Kitchen Queerly. This is a fantastic title. It makes me think about kitchens completely in a new form. Very rigorous. I think the theory that you brought in was really new to me. I appreciate that. Chrononormativity will be a term that I will be taking with me. Yeah, the space, the kitchen has become this multi-layered, really complex space that I think asks a lot of pertinent questions and where we are at the moment, where we should be at the moment. And I've written here, disorientation to find a new orientation. And I get the loaded nature of this word orientation, but I do think it has something to do with this confusion, this failure, this sort of chaos that's coming at me, and this unseating of my comfort zone is what allows me to start to question the normative narrative of some of our social history. I think it's very well done. And I'd like to push you to have a look at one of my favorite videos, 1990, from filmmaker Martin Arnold. In French, it's Passage à l'acte. It's based on To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think it has a similar frenetic element to it that might be interesting, although it looks at maybe domesticity and race. Yeah, have a look. Alana, Opera Visage. Yeah, I would love to make my own mask. And I think along the way that you've got these sort of Picasso-esque collages of all these different references, I think that metaphor of your masks, I'd be really interested to also do that with the complexity of emotion, and what are ways we can actually come up with new emotions. And so I started to play this game. What happens if I'm feeling envy, helplessness, and anxiety at the same time? And so how might that mask be made out of different references, or how could it go even further that I could, as the user, actually kind of have a personal experience of how this might happen? You know, it's an interesting thing as we are kind of being more and more conforming to this, you know, it's all good mentality that we're living in today. Okay, take a deep breath. We're about halfway there. Aishwarya, the Neg Entropic Project. Thank you really for introducing a difficult topic, around death as disorder, as something that we want to push away and ignore, and figuring out ways that not only can we change our relationship, but we can change our rituals, we can change our architecture, we can change our entire community structures in order to embrace what should be a natural process. I think within this, I want to introduce or question or somehow shake this up a little bit to think about the time, you know, the space between where we are now and then this utopic kind of proposal that you've made, and how is it that we can introduce communities into the actual making of community maps. I asked the question, can rituals be co-created? Can community members day to day shape something, and how can the architecture respond to that, the sort of fixed element of the architecture? You know, how can this relationship between fixed spaces and then the non-static ideas of ritual and behavior change over time? And ultimately, for designers, what is the role of design to facilitate this difficult conversation and to shape the processes that will lead to a splendid array of outcomes that will be able to think about death as an integral part of how we live our lives? Next, we have Keda, Cloud Seeds. I have just discovered the joy of plant care after decades of thinking I couldn't keep them alive, mostly during the pandemic. And I think that's for a reason, that we've moved a little bit consciously into our home spaces, and taking care of plants has somehow become a metaphor for something larger. And so this made me think about, what are we tending to? I think you asked the question, you know, are we tending to our feeds, or are we feeding the things that we need to, that we care about, whether it be plants or otherwise? You know, what are we feeding? What are we tending to? What are we caring about? I played around a little bit with you. You had sort of used this word, you know, limiting it to this domestic relationship that we have to our houseplants. And I wondered as well, what would happen if we, rather than thinking about the domesticated plant, that we could also think about other plants, the orphaned plants, the street plants, the wild plants, that our relationship to these non-human yet organic objects in the world might also be able to reflect back on a bigger question of cultural responsibility and collectivity. And lastly, we have Maya's project, Toxic Love and Femme Futures. I think this project is close to a lot of the things that I'm thinking about right now. How can design reveal, unmask? How can it elevate? How can it facilitate further production of knowledge around topics? And I think you really started to introduce ways that design can really create spaces for this co-creation of knowledge to happen through your podcast. And your podcast proposals really resonated with me in terms of an expanded idea of what is design, media design, and that it actually is in this way, a structural system of asking questions, and how that creates a space for community to form and creates a space for call to action. That not only do we need the objects, but we can think about the processes around it. I've also written here visibility, invisibility of bodies, of toxicity, of danger, of labor, of occupation, and even the way that it's even coming down to just manufacturing, all of these elements that your project has so well and on so many levels really addressed. So on that note, we find ourselves in April of 2021, and without a doubt, I think looking at your projects as a whole, I can see how the topics and the research have been informed by where we are at and what we've been through. And I think design responds, and design can also imagine. I think these two directions are really something to celebrate for the fields that we're in. So I have some keywords on one side: community, social spaces. Who are we sharing spaces with? How can we share spaces? How do we navigate spaces? How do we extend spaces? Spaces of care, spaces of belonging. Who belongs, and how do we create spaces that invite more belonging? And how can we as designers help shape these spaces? I think all along that we have a more of a perhaps political slant to really think about visibility and the elevating of ideas and voices and perspectives and narratives, and how we can really use design in some ways as a Trojan horse in the face of these things that we want to reject, the things that are foreign, the toxic, the danger, the disorder, that there's sort of this outsideness. So even though there's some dystopia kind of trends that are running through some of your projects, I find myself with a lot of optimism coming out of your projects in my speculative imagination moving forward. And ultimately, we're in this unique moment that's gotten us this far, and hopefully we can really hold on to some of these key ideas of balance and harmony and care that we can take with us as we move forward. So on that note, thank you for your projects and for your hard work. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Goodbye.
Okay, so thank you so much to Emily. That was so generous. And we do have videos to share with all of the students. I mean, videos, diagrams. And we can discuss some of the issues she brought up after our open discussion at 5 o'clock tonight. And next up, we have Keisuke Kuniyoshi. Take it away.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Keisuke Kuniyoshi. I'm excited to share my thesis project, Rally Cruisin'. Let's do this.
Snapshot, then our universe was found. Just like the northern lights, magnetic you and me. If I be right here, will you be my
gazed in wide wonder at the joy they had found. The head nurse spoke up, said, leave this one alone. She could tell right away that I was bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad. Bad. WELOVE 108 FM.
Another summer. Sound of the funky drummer. Music hitting your heart, cause I know you got a soul. Hey, listen if you're missing, y'all. Swinging while I'm singing. Hey, giving what you're getting. Knowing what I know in. While the black band's sweating. In the rhythm I'm rolling. Gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey, our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. Fight the power! 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 We got to fight the powers that be! As the rhythm's designed to bounce with counts and that the rhyme designed to fill your mind. Now that you realize the prize arrives, we got to pump the stuff to make it tough. From the heart, it's a start, a work of art to revolutionize, make a change, something strange. People, we are the same, no we're not the same, cause we don't know the game. What we need is awareness, we can't get careless. You say, what is this? Our beloved, let's get down to business. Mental self-defense of fitness. Don't rest the show. You got to go with what you know to make everybody see. In order to fight the powers that be.
Thanks everybody for watching. To get some context, I'm a car enthusiast and my hobby of cruising in California evolved into a necessity when I took up driving as an UberX driver, compiling 7,000 rides between San Diego, Los Angeles, and Santa Barbara. And through this project, it allowed me to voice exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keisuke, and excellent to hear about your life experience being such an integral part of the evolution of your thesis work. Anne chimes in, loving the emphasis on the collective in these projects in general. And Elise gets a laugh out of sponsors of Reddit, Wall Street Bets subreddit, and gaming, GameStop. Love the Institute, says Maggie. Norman Klein chimes in, as the windshield and the computer screen melt after decades of nearly meeting or melting, I think melting. Apps to resist apps, says Anne. And yeah, lots of good comments, I'm sure still to come. Thank you so much, Keisuke. Next up, we have Soo Jin Lee. Take it away.
Hi everyone, this is Soo Jin. Today I'm going to live present my thesis called Portrait 2.0. Portrait 2.0 is a self-representative portrait in virtual space using online behavior. Portrait 2.0 started with questions about data ownership, privacy, and sharing in online space. It evolved into interpreting these questions and ideas as a new type of portrait, reflecting an individual's online behavior and history. The portraits here are an amalgamation of online behavior, information, and data that are representative of someone. The portraits are aiming to question what influences our online identity and how we are perceived inside and outside of cyberspace. This is similar to the concept of traditional portraits with how they show other elements such as body language and objects to represent the subject. Portrait 2.0 proposed that data is an important fragment of our representation. To deliver this idea of portraits, I propose a website as the main platform for sharing portraits and asking for data submission to produce the portraits. The website is consistent with various pages detailing the project description, process, and participation. On each page, there are some welcoming and warning messages as people explore. Through the messages, I briefly state what participants can expect from the portraits and when exploring the website. On this website, I'm the guide who facilitates the process of portrait creation, helping people explore their online presence and increasing people's understanding and awareness by visualizing their data. This project is especially for people who are interested to know about or are worried about their data. I hope this project helps them to gain a deeper appreciation of their data capture, ownership, privacy, and sharing. As a part of the portrait generation process, I've collected data files from people and translated them into a texture. I asked people to export their data through Google Takeout. With this process, I wanted participants to understand the behind the scenes of data gathering from a company like Google. With help from a pre-existing data collection and exporting website, I produced portraits following a set of rules I created. In particular, search history, site visit history, number of files in the drive, and languages produced a head, texture, and color. I made a website focusing on data submission while maintaining a professional but often sarcastic voice. I'd like to generate awareness in visitors and participants of this project about their data privacy. So when they are asked to donate their data for the project, I added more clarity and confirmation requests on disclaimers throughout the website. Portraits from this project show you the hidden and visible sides of someone, and these makes viewers reflect on their data and think about the amount, nature, and availability of data in cyberspace. Hopefully, this project encourages viewers to think more carefully about their online activity and available online data after they visit. Thank you.
Thanks, Soo Jin. Great work. Anne mentions in the chat that she'd be curious to see how these might be used in tightly controlled identity contexts, such as immigration or health. Tim also, throws an idea out of whether they might be portraits for the new COVID passport. I think raising some interesting issues around how the pandemic has also forced us to contend with how much we give away about our own status, health status. And then I was also just noting that I've gone onto the site to try to generate a portrait, and just the way that you foregrounded the terms and conditions, it feels familiar in the language, but immediately a lot more menacing than what I'm used to. Maggie notes visualizing T+C, terms and conditions, would be an interesting corollary, and asks how you would look if you used this site or service. Some cheers of encouragement there. Go Soo Jin, go all Thesis. And with that, I'm going to introduce Jingyi Wang.
hello everyone. This is Jingyi presenting my graduate thesis project, C, the future dumpling making and dining experience. This project started with my critique of the current food industry that is efficiency driven and machine dominated. The automated technology replaces human labor in the food production process, leading to a disengaging and disconnected relationship between us diners, the local culinary community, and the natural ecology of food sources. So taking dumpling, a traditional dish from my culture as a vehicle, I started thinking about new ways to engage human and the ecology through non-dominating assistive technology. So this project reimagines the future of experience-centered dining in 2025 after our complicated relationship with food going through the automation and exotic exploration of high-tech dining. The experience center is built on the land of Shalio village, a traditionally operated village that's heavily relying on natural agricultural resources. The intention behind this location choice is to propose natural constraints without the intrusiveness of modern technology. The dining units are scattered on sections of farmlands, which are operated by the local residents. Visitors engage with the local community and get to be close to the nature and food sources by foraging their dumpling ingredients from these farms. So all the recipes created by visitors are documented step by step and can be uploaded to the digital recipe book for the purpose of connecting and inspiring diners over the spectrum of time and space. The assistive technology I see provides guidance, instruction, and information along the making process. The goal is to preserve the informational and productive efficiency without compromising the essential making experience. So to demonstrate the feature, I have detailed out the user experience of Ying, whose understanding of dumpling is associated with her cultural background. And she came with two friends, Yun, who is a creative and brave maker, and who loves to experiment with new forms and shapes, and Fang, who is not comfortable being creative when it comes to cooking, but who is a logical problem solver. So upon entrance, the biometrical scanning builds their user profile. The system allows smart task management that's tailored to each group's strength and preference. So in this case, Fang is assigned to be the dough engineer since they're facing a seasonal wheat shortage. And Ying has collected the ingredient from the farm. So by displaying the culinary data and possible combination, the system helps her organizing and be creative about the recipe. And during the making process, they can choose to create their own recipe or follow a particular one from the recipe book, in which case the system will help giving instructions along the process. So depending on the seasonal and the geological constraint of the visit, the diners will need to be innovative and adaptive about their ingredient engineering. So for example, due to the seasonal wheat shortage, Fang chose to use corn flour as an alternative. Such substitute of the ingredient leads to the change of texture and cooking method, requiring them to be experiment with new techniques and creative choices of dumpling making. So the output of this experience is not necessarily the most delicious or presentable, but rather a documentation of diners' creativity under a natural constraint and community inspiration. So I wanted this experience to be able to capture the individuality of this each visitor and bring back the personal, creative, and intimate aspect of food to the future dining. And more information and process of this project can be viewed at my website. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jingyi. The spaces you've designed seem like a cross between science museum and lab, so far from a kitchen, says Elise. And Anne chiming in with creative and intimacy of food is crucial, is critical. And I'm sure we'll have more comments in our open conversation, and we welcome everyone to chime in to do that. It's always a good opportunity to have more open discussion. Next up, we have Rachel Rose, Waterhouse. Take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel and I'm going to be presenting my thesis project, Composable Assemblages. Composable Assemblages is a thesis project that examines how utilitarian infrastructures have transformed the relationship between humans and the natural environment. It asks, how can design help renegotiate the capitalistic paradigms that drive them so that we can better coexist with nature? In the coefficient data center, I consider how data centers power the World Wide Web. Housing upwards of tens of thousands of machines running 24/7 with minimal downtime, it is estimated that around 17% of the global carbon footprint caused by technology is due to data centers. This is because data centers generate a lot of heat and constantly need to be cooled. Large tech companies like Microsoft have looked to water resources as a cooling solution by pumping groundwater, building data centers near lakes and rivers, and even submerging them in the ocean. Though these methods are called sustainable, the data centers are heating natural water systems, and the long-term impacts on surrounding ecosystems are not well understood. I imagined a fictional corporation called Coefficient, whose data center is located at the bottom of a lake and operates based on the health conditions of the surrounding environment. These are calculated with environmental sensing mechanisms that utilize computer vision and machine learning for monitoring the health of underwater flora and fauna. If the environmental health conditions go down, the servers will become less efficient, slowing operations in response. This work not only means to engage tech companies as being held more responsible for the environment, but to highlight the gap between internet consumption and the downstream impacts on the environment. If servers are no longer allowed to run 24/7 with minimal downtime, how would we adapt? Could environmental conditions determine when websites shut down, or determine the resolution or quality of our streaming services? The leaky pipe network imagines what happens when we intentionally make networks of infrastructure like that of water intentionally inefficient. What I really mean here is what happens when we shift our definitions of efficiency, who gets to benefit from that and who is left out. A network of community volunteers go into the field to intentionally create water leaks in pipes, distributing water as a way of supporting and sustaining ecosystems. The design of this guidebook imagines the role of the leak engineer, detailing descriptions of their field equipment and guidelines for installing leaks. The library of leaky fittings is made up of open-sourced spigots and spouts, designed in collaboration with members of the community. It is the leak engineer's responsibility to understand which fittings work best for each situation, based on the environmental context. Some years in the future, the work of the leaky pipe network is on display at a museum. Originally, this particular landscape used to be barren, cleared for the construction of water pipes, but has since become a space for wilderness to thrive. Finally, Wi-Fi landscaping is a provocation that features a fictional plant catalog. In this catalog, each plant species is categorized based on the degree to which they interfere with wireless telecommunication signals. When it comes to landscaping, the choice of plant species is largely based on aesthetics. Here, it's not just about aesthetics, but an added functionality or feature that nature offers us. I can imagine that some people might choose to plant species that have the least amount of interference with wireless signals, but maybe others would choose to do the exact opposite and plant only species that have the highest amount of interference. The catalog is designed based on research around how forested landscapes have negative effects on wireless signal propagation, suggesting that the leaf density from conifer trees frequently show more losses in signal than deciduous trees. This work also considers contested research around the impact of Wi-Fi radiation on plants, where one study shows how trees can suffer from bleeding and hindered root growth. I play with this in the form of a customer review, which reports the irony of a top-selling tree doing well at not interfering with signals, but the trade-off is that it's dying because of it. The scenario is meant to engage viewers in thinking about the sometimes surface-level relationship that humans have to entities like trees, one that's based on aesthetics and functionality of wilderness rather than wilderness itself. Thank you so much for watching. Please visit my website at compostableassemblages.cargo.site. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. A lot of discussion going on in the chat right now. Sean, just complimenting you on the questions that you're asking with this project. Tim also noting that it really prompts reflection on the environmental costs of our pandemic, always on habits of streaming and internet life. I like the phrase installing leaks. That was my addition to the conversation. But Norman is saying the hidden puzzle of how to solve the way that electric grids can evolve. Interesting to enter this puzzle. And Mimi also kind of, talking about this project or encouraging us to think about this project in relationship to the recent critiques of NFT art as environmentally burdensome. And with a recommendation to see these projects displayed at the Center for Land Use Interpretation. And Maggie also adding to the thread about environmental sustainability and our technological habits by saying, by kind of noting about Facebook just announcing that it is carbon neutral. Some laughs after that. And yeah, a lot more, I think, for us to go through, but to keep it moving, we'll circle back on that later. I'd love to introduce Martin Bernard.
Hey everyone, I'm Martin. I will be sharing with you some of my thesis project, the Overcasting Almanac. This is what an issue of the Almanac looks like. It's a coded publication that's dedicated to climate-related data visualization. It's like a collection of articles, tweets, sketches, and it reads a little bit like an interactive newsletter. Each issue is developed in an online dynamic coding notebook on the Observable Notebooks platform. You might be asking, what is a dynamic coding notebook? It's a great question. It's like been a central one in my thesis project all year. For now, I'll say that it's a class of software prototyping tools, of which many new examples have been developed in the last few years. It's been quite popular. And the platform of Observable specifically is dedicated to data visualization. And it also acts as a forum where users can share notebooks and code. It's not too dissimilar from something like GitHub, but it has a more focused application and its content is a bit more interactive. So the way I think about it, my project Overcasting kind of fits in here. It takes some of the collaborative open source software tools from GitHub and Observable, and it merges them with a point of view and a narrative that come more from the world of publishing and journalism. And this is the current structure of the Almanac. Similar to repositories on GitHub, notebooks can be forked and edited, or created a new version of. And so each new issue of Overcasting exists as a fork of the previous one, creates a kind of tree that represents the publication as a whole. So I invite everyone to check out the publication, but for now I'd like to talk about a recent experiment that is part of the third issue. So I can click through to that. So here we're looking at the third issue. And the main article in this issue was talking through kind of the publication's approach to collaboration and what it means in this format. And coincidentally, right after I finished writing this issue, Observable released a new feature that essentially allows Google Docs type collaboration in their notebooks, meaning that users can live edit the same notebook at the same time, which is previously not a thing you could do. So a friend and I decided to test this out by using the new feature to have a conversation about the question that I began the presentation with, what is a dynamic coding notebook? And this notebook here is both a a record of that conversation, and it's the actual place where that conversation took place and is still taking place. So we wrote responses to each other and included things. And the main thing I want to point out here is that the tool wasn't necessarily planned as a, wasn't necessarily meant for conversations, but it allows for us to kind of create small tools on the fly to facilitate the discourse. And so Lucas created a bibliography tool that allows for us to kind of format the citations that we're going through. And I created this chess clock type situation at the top, which kind of allows us to say when our turn has been ended and pass the ball back to the other person. So even though these notebooks weren't designed for conversations, they allow for these small designs to be created within them. And that's kind of, I think, an illustration of a central theme of my larger project, which is advocating for collections of new little designs that are rooted in collaborative tinkering and conversation. Thanks so much. I'll leave you with a nice time lapse.
Thank you so much, Martin. We'd love to just hang out at that time lapse right now. It's pretty nice. Just to jump in on some of the comments here, Maxim says, I love the interplay of meanings or the words issue, reporting, publishing in the examination of code as language. Tim Berners-Lee would be so proud. And my video is off. I'm going to turn that on now. The dynamic notebook format makes me wonder about the moment of publishing when the content isn't final even after it goes public, says Elise. And chiming in as well, curious what reading practices result from the forking affordance. How does one decide where to go next? Is it like choose your own adventure? And I was sort of remarking that there used to be nothing older than a publication about the weather, but oddly, your project, it almost feels like a revelation that the weather is almost the ideal subject for kind of a living almanac. And of course, again, we welcome much more conversation later. Very provocative project. Thanks again, Martin. Next up, we have An Pan.
Hi, my name is An Pan. My thesis title is Third Space. Today, I'm gonna invite my friend, also named An, to guide you through this space of hybridity.
Hi, welcome to Third Space. My name's An, and I will be a tour guide today. Now we are under a subway station. You may be curious why our journey started underground. In fact, this is the birthplace of Third Space. Third Space is a hybrid space where diverse cultures intersect and negotiate, therefore created a space with a unique sense of authenticity. Please pay attention to the train coach behind me. It used to be a section of the famous Orient Express, serving many wealthy Western passengers longing for exotic adventures and romantic affairs. But one day, the train passed this place and crashed. It stopped permanently. The local kept one train coach and turned it into a bar, as we can see today. And don't be surprised that this bar offers more than just cocktails. It is also a salon where designers, artists, craftsmen, factory workers, even tech company rebels around the world communicate, collaborate, and create together. People in Third Space love cultures. They understand its complexity and celebrate its diversity with confidence. There are many tensions in Third Space. Instead of solving them, people build up a stronger relationship by putting tensions in dialogues, no matter between East and West, craft and manufacture, individual and collective, and many more. Now let's get our tour started. The first stop of our tour is the Harmony Garden. It is one of my favorite places in Third Space. Everything in this garden is designed based on the harmonious relationship between man, nature, technology, and the environment. Look at the lotus humidifiers. Why need a tank if we can get resources from nature effortlessly? Here we are at the Chinatown. It was originally a fluid semi-shared cultural community in Third Space. Originally during the Spring Festival, this place will be crowded with people celebrating. but this year all kinds of gathering events are cancelled. What I hold on my hand is a drum headphone for line dance performance especially designed for this isolated New Year celebration. This new performative instrument is a hybridization of a rattle drum, a traditional Chinese instrument, and a piece of headphone. This instrument device is played by shaking your head, and when you do so, a digital line mask will be triggered. It is a performer, drummer, viewer experience all in one action. Also, an anecdote about this drum headphone. I heard that the product will make people feel dizzy after using it for a long time. It is about lunchtime. For today's lunch, we are going to have the most famous food in the search space, the panoramic pancake. We cook it with a special tool called pancake selfie stick, which is a mix of a pancake spread and a selfie stick based on their similar forms. But with its hybridized functionality, it allows you to generate a panoramic video with a unique pancake perspective during your cooking time. Don't be shy to do this weird thing. In third space, being normal is weird. Now we're gonna take a metro back to where we started this tour today. On the metro in search space, you will probably see someone use this fan to cover their face while playing music, especially during rush hours. People here use the fan to mediate privacy, similar to what you might do with your headphones in public spaces. The history of this interaction can date back to ancient China, where people would use fans to avoid unwanted social interactions as well as starting conversations. Covering faces with a fan created a temporary semi-public space on crowded subway, but don't feel like they're just rejecting you. The design of this fan takes into account that curious tourists may take pictures of them, so if you're trying to shoot this unfamiliar behavior with your smartphone, you will also get a sneak peek of the music they're playing as well as their current mood from the hidden AR layer. It is a very nuanced way to socialize in search space. If you want to try them, you can rent them at the vending machine in each metro station. Our last stop for today is the new Shenzhai factory. Residents can use an online platform to order their own hybrid objects and produce it here. The new Shenzhai factory includes a prototyping center and a manufacturing tower. The products designed here are not from scratch, but through the process of selection of pre-existing things, followed by deconstruction, analysis, and hybridization to create something new with unique authenticity and creativity. This approach can greatly reduce the development time and further strengthen the collaboration among specialists in different fields. Even though the factory is fully automated, a part of the work is still handmade by humans. Remember the embroidered electronics on fan surface? We treasure factory labor like soldering as a kind of craft making and artwork by flipping the hidden labor from inside out. Our tour is about to end. If you want to know more about Third Space, you can come to the bar and join tonight's salon. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, An. I am definitely ready to go to the bar tonight and join the salon. Anne is really curious. I'd love to hear you talk about how this project might be different if you had developed it while living in a different city. Definitely something I think we'd love to hear more about when we go into the open discussion portion of it. I commented that the pancake selfie stick now seems so natural to me after having seen it for a few weeks. So I'm ready for panorama pancake as well. Anne is too. She's also really saying that it's great to see the videos of your prototypes in use and that they're so provocative. Yeah, Mimi also echoing that. Great to see these prototypes set within your world building. And Norman Klein saying a futuristic faux future, especially the panoramic pancake, almost like a set design for a Philip K. Dick novel. High praise, I think. Is there a hidden narrative glitch somewhere as in a novel driving the action to odd challenges? Does this world ever crack, or is it the subject more the point of view of an imaginary view? Tim also notes that it reminds us how absent cultural content is from most considerations of industrial manufacturing and production. Thanks so much, An. We've gone through now our second group of thesis projects, and so I'd like to hand it back to Anne to introduce our next respondent.
Hello, everyone. Okay, let's see if I can get it right this time. Up next as our guest respondent is Stuart Candy, who's an associate professor in the School of Design at Carnegie Mellon University. As a futurist, Stuart works with learners, leaders, and creatives around the world to amplify their ability to shape preferred futures through media and design projects and frameworks. He's co-editor with Cher Potter of Design and Futures and the co-creator with Jeff Watson of the acclaimed imagination game, The Thing from the Future. Stuart continues to refine a futuring methodology he calls experiential futures. Most recently, his students created cultural objects from the futures discussed at the World Economic Forum's first ever Global Technology Governance Summit. And he just hosted the opening session of the UNDP's annual innovation event with interviews staged through future artifacts that he and his partner, Sizhe, designed in dialogue with the panel's world leaders. Stuart holds degrees in arts and law from the University of Melbourne and an MA and PhD from the Futures program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He wishes he could be here with us today, but he has sent this video in his place. All right. Are we ready to roll? We are ready to roll. Here's Stuart.
It's a pleasure to be virtually with you, and thank you for this chance to respond. I come to this project or to this review from the angle of a professional futurist and a design professor. So there may be certain things here that I just miss, or that I don't, that are not entirely on my wavelength. So that's the other the other caveat here. That the perspective I'm coming from is informed primarily by this question of how to make futures come to life for people through design and media and experiences. So let's start with Keisuke's project, Rally Cruisin', which I really enjoyed. I mean, funny, playful, kind of absurd 90s psychedelic, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, went to, read some Noam Chomsky and became hardcore socialists. Really great aesthetic. And the project sort of throws everything at the strategy of making the use of the app seem cool and compelling and seductive, and it does that really well. Hell yeah, rally cruising is what I'm thinking to myself if I, try to put myself in the position of someone looking at this thinking, could I engage this as a driver? The other question, though, that I think I would have as an Uber driver doing it, probably not because it's the coolest thing I can do with my time, but because I need to make a living, and certainly a question that I have as an interested onlooker here is, could this actually work? And just, economically, and if so, how would it work? And so closing the deal here is not just about an appealing positioning and compelling branding and a great aesthetic. You have all of that. But what I wondered is, how do the economics pencil out? And I looked for that on the website and couldn't seem to find it. So I don't know whether you'd call this speculative design. It's certainly critical from what I can see. And it's absolutely discursive in the sense that it's intended to contribute to a conversation, from what I understand. But the power of design as rhetoric is also in terms of how kind of viable the proposition may seem in terms of how it connects with the system and the way that system ticks. So, gestural projects are fine. Yeah, let's start the revolution. Hell yeah. But this project seems to me to be more than halfway to actually being serious about that. And it makes me ask, what else needs to happen in order for this to work? And that, $125 jacket on the merch page feels, I'm sorry to say, very capitalist. And there's a bit of an irony there. And perhaps that's deliberate or perhaps not. But it's a question, I think, for future development in this project and in this vein. The last thing I want to say is that the Institute for Collective Adversarial Technology sounds really promising. I don't know whether that's sort of part of the fiction or whether that's, something that you intend to continue with, but it seems very needed and very promising. So I hope you do continue with it. Thank you, Keisuke, for that. Soo Jin, Portrait 2.0. So this project with the data collection on one hand and portrait generation on the other has a built-in tension between anonymity, of course, and legibility of the contents of the data that you're using, which you're really using here to visualize, as I understand it. And the main question that this took me to actually was, and again, this is sort of like a next steps for the project type question, I would say, is how might the users themselves actually choose to put thresholds in different places or to vary different parameters in order to explore the data that is there to the purpose of your project, understanding data capture and ownership and privacy, and how much of our lives are logged by a company like Google. Might a future version of this project allow people to make more of those choices about what colors to use, about what thresholds to use, about what metaphors or shapes to build on, to make more of those choices for themselves so they can explore the data by making choices and seeing the changes that appear. Could you go into the ear hole and listen to what you've recently listened on Spotify or Pandora? Or could you go behind the eyes and see recent image searches or YouTube videos? I mean, I think there's incredible richness in the metaphor or the container of the head or even more broadly the body. And it kind of made me want to take those questions further and wonder what you might do with this to take it forward. So thank you, Soo Jin, for this project. Jingyi, and your project, She, I think I'm saying that right. So it's a critique of industrialized, standardized food production, as I understand it. And you had me at dumplings, honestly. My partner and I learned to make dumplings with friends in Toronto, where we used to live, and making them in a big group is one of the greatest food making pleasures I think I've ever had. And so in a way, the website that you've done is attractive and engaging. But at the same time, it seems like there's a question here that this project raises, the approach that you've taken to it raises, which is, when is technology the right thing to add and how much of it? And it's almost like a taste thing. It's almost like a cooking decision or a recipe, a judgment call about how much and when and what fits with your intent. But I think for me, I detected a kind of irony here, because I would rather learn from a person than from a touch-sensitive surface and a web page, no matter how beautifully designed it is, and it is beautifully designed. So I wonder for sort of next steps about if there is some seed here of a return to the sociality and to the engagement with ecology and personal taste and to being with each other and cooking that could be leveraged into or used in, COVID lockdown or even post-COVID, but international contexts of being remote and yet brought together by food. I feel like there's a real seed there that's very interesting and could be grown into something quite wonderful. But thank you very much again, Jingyi, for your project. Rachel Rose Waterhouse, composable assemblages. So 3 projects here, and I liked all of them. The underwater data center that you kind of reproduced at small scale to see how it would work with a Raspberry Pi and a fish aquarium. I thought your fish tank was great. And the idea of closing the feedback loop between measures of environmental health and the operations of certain servers and getting feedback as a user about why a certain website is down, that seems really really brilliant to me. I'd love to actually see that implemented if that is possible to do. And speaking of implementation, I think the Leaky Pipe Network, which reminded me, the guidebook reminded me of the hackers cookbook and terrorists cookbook that used to circulate kind of underground prior to the real takeoff of the World Wide Web. This subversive, not just dialogue with, but intervention in infrastructure is very intriguing. And seeing the fittings, the custom interventionist fittings mocked up really made me eager to see physical prototypes and to see them deployed. And you mentioned Tiga Brain as an inspiration. One of the other people or projects that this reminded me of in an oblique way is some colleagues from here in Pittsburgh, Rich Pell and Lauren Allen, who run the Center for Post-Natural History, which perhaps you've come across, but if not, I recommend you check it out. And then Wi-Fi landscaping, I really liked this one too. And I guess my main thought here is that the more practical the speculation or the more practical the question is, the more applied it seems the project kind of almost demands to be. So, the purchasing website or interface with customers' reviews for how different foliage patterns perform for signal interference or non-interference is great. But it kind of made me wonder, how would this actually apply to particular locations, real ones that you care about and perhaps have some connection to. And it wasn't as clear for me where you stood with this project, which is not necessarily a problem, but it is kind of more of a question, because I think after the first two, where you have what feels like an overtly activist intent and an agenda, where's your commitment here was a question that arose for me, but really appreciated all of these projects. Thank you, Rachel. Martin Bernard, the Overcasting Almanac. So the almanac term kind of promised a level of, in my mind, promised a kind of level of comprehensiveness that I think was in some ways belied by the sample of three different approaches that we see kind of played out, the three different types of casting that you're working with there. One question I had was, I'm not sure if you're aware of backcasting as a futures method. It is one kind of based on stipulating or assuming a particular future state and then trying to work your way backwards from that, narratively even, to say what would it take for this in order for this to happen, and then you can use that to kind of make decisions going forward about moving towards a future that you prefer and away from one you don't. But anyway, just to put that on your radar if it wasn't. That's a question that I have for you, I guess. If, as you say in the video, that really creating together socially is really the end goal. I thought the most promising thing and exciting thing here seemed to be the dialogue that was building up between you and your Caltech collaborator. And if that was kind of a core success of the experiment, and I won't actually put that more as a question than as a statement, because it's up to you how well this has succeeded in what you were hoping for. But if that were kind of a core to it, then how would you build on that? How would you build on that dialogue and on that sort of co-authoring that this platform enables? Because of course the formal aspect of this experiment could be applied, as far as I can tell, to any topic, not just to climate and to the aspects of it that you've assembled here. So there's some promising next steps here, it seems to me, if you did want to take this forward. But thank you, Martin, for this project. And then finally, Anne's project or trio of projects, Pancake Panorama, Solo Spring Festival, Translucent Privacy, really, reminded me of the Chingdogu, Japanese, unuseless inventions and design as play and as kind of a source of delight, which I really enjoyed. It also reminded me of, and I expect you probably are aware of this work, but Bruce Sterling's diagram of anti-conventional objects, which sort of disputes the classic human-centered design trio of desirable, buildable, and profitable, and says, well, if you relax one or more of those, it opens up all kinds of space, a much bigger and also, sillier, perhaps, design space. And I think what lifts a speculative project like this, or this specific one, above kind of the ordinary run of just of speculations, is that you're grounding it in cultural specificity, in place, in tradition, in the language and idioms of where I suppose you come from, and that makes it, it ties it to something that to a meaning-making structure that matters. Whereas there is frequently, I find in speculative projects, a kind of unmoored, what if, hovering in the ether, that didn't feel, even though you're exploring some, pretty out there and playful and whimsical ideas, the cultural and location grounding helped to bring it back to something that matters to us as an audience. And it really feels like a celebration of, of the kind of, we can make anything, particularly, the hybrid or recombining manufacturers app, like you can put this together with this and decorate it any way you want. There's a celebration there. But I think there's also, and this is a comment not just about your project, but kind of about speculative work in general, if we can take it there. If we can make anything, what should we make? And what should we not? And I detected some kind of maybe critical potential here for asking questions and maybe some satirical potential here around the device being used solo by a person to entertain themselves in a way that kind of bubbles them and cuts them off from the co-creation and the sociality of making music together, which I gather is what it is based on. I wonder how you feel about that, and whether that's actually something that you want, or if that was sort of just a side effect of what could I do? And I think these questions, continue to arise around speculative processes when you take away the kind of, this must be buildable, profitable, viable, and saleable to a client. When you take those breaks off, it opens up so much more territory, but it also becomes, I think, incumbent on us as designers to be clear about why we're asking these questions and what we're advocating for with some of the design choices that we make. For futures-oriented work, for experiential scenarios or speculative design, if you prefer design fiction, I always ask when I'm reading it, what kind of world is this telling me about? And when I'm making them, I ask, what kind of world am I trying to have people encounter or communicate with? And that, I mean, that's not just a one-liner generally. There might be a whole lot of, there might be a much longer answer there about what kind of scenario is being manifested through a sort of small tip of the iceberg in a design project. But I think these are the kinds of generative questions that we can carry forward into future practice and future projects. I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to encounter your work and to share these thoughts about it. It's a pleasure. I hope this has been helpful. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but congratulations on your thesis projects, and best of luck with all your next steps. Bye.
Okay, thank you so much to Stuart Candy and to Emily Smith for their very generous commentary. Now I would like to invite all of our participants to turn on their videos and join me. We're at the 5 o'clock hour, and this concludes a sort of formal presentation section. For the next 30 minutes, we'll be having a group collective conversation, and we invite you to stick around if you'd like, on those of our friends who are watching on YouTube. And so yes, so I'm going to switch to gallery view here. There, let's give a round of applause for our graduating class. Yeah, well done. Okay, so all of our other students and faculty who are joining us, you're welcome to also turn on your videos now and be a part of the conversation. We're going to open this up to questions. Please use the raise hand thing if you can. We'll see how that works. And yeah, so we also invite the students, if you have any kind of response that you'd like to deliver to the respondents, a rebuttal or whatever it might be, please feel free to do so as well. Are there any questions out there in the audience? Sean Donahue.
Thank you, Anne, and again, congratulations. Thank you all for all of the energy and the effort that you've put into this work over the last few years, and certainly even until the event of today and the time of today. So again, thank you for all this amazing energy and allowing us to be part of that with you in that journey. Something interesting kind of occurred to me being on this side of it, and I've been talking to kind of everybody, like it's fun for me to be able to participate in this way. When Emily and Stuart were talking about the work, they spoke about every single one of them in the context of being in the world, right? Not in a silo of this is your personal investigation, although we recognize they were, not as this is a graduate project in school, but they spoke about them as things with agency in the world in every instance. And I was really taken by that. That's not always the default. And so I guess a question I would offer the group to respond to is, now that you're moving through this threshold in some ways, and the journey maybe is less kind of reflecting on your own orientations and making of the work, where do you see this work going in the world, or how do you see its agency in the world as it goes forward? I really enjoyed Emily Stewart positioning their comments that way, and so I would offer an opportunity for you to begin to transition to that thinking of where you see this being after here.
Yeah, do any of the students of the graduates want to respond to that question? Where are you going next with this work? How does it live beyond this window here? Class of 2021, stepping up. Go on.
I'll talk because I feel uncomfortable with silence. For me, and I think a lot of my classmates, is what Thesis has allowed for is a creation of a process that I think can influence the way that maybe I will work in the future and some of my classmates. And so, and I think Emily commented on this a little bit, but the idea of a podcast as a form of media to use with and tied with design is something for me, like this is a framework that I think I can bring forward. And I mentioned that I will plan to hopefully bring that framework forward with projects that are not mine if I don't have time to actually build something to the level that I did for my thesis. So I think more so than maybe the work itself, it's like the process of making that feels replicable for me personally. And that part is quite exciting.
Great, thank you, Maya. Does anybody else want to share where next with all of this? You had lots of great suggestions of places that to take this work.
I mean, I thought about in terms of with rally cruising. I mean, it'd be interesting to start talking more to like the ride-hailing organizations in general, and just start to start that kind of dialogue and conversation, how to like enable drivers moving forward, regardless of whether this is technology or not. And, you know, as well as, you know, actually, if it's possible to make it real so that it could possibly help drivers. You know, it's not a guarantee or anything, but the ins and outs of it, how the driver, you know, responds to Uber app and everything, I think would be really good for them post, you know, pandemic, especially.
Are you interested, Keisuke, in this idea of kind of app activism, or this a kind of design practice around enabling resistance?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, no, I'm always for it. You know, my background in graffiti, and so I've been doing that since I was a kid, you know, running the streets. And so I think I'm just like translating now into the digital world, which is awesome. So, and, you know, it's just a nice way to kind of like, you know, for the everyday people to possibly have like an opportunity to have a choice as to what they want in their outcome and the control of their, you know, economics.
Great. I love seeing a role for design and things like that. Norman's raising his hand. Exciting to see and hear from you, Norman.
Great to see the future that has been happening while I've been living in the present, you know, this kind of thing. But a question is sort of haunting me as I'm watching all of these. They're moving in a direction that seems to be inevitable. I often say as a joke that we live in the moment, but we don't live in the present, you know. So so even though they're presenting the present, it's actually crying out for some other X factor to sort of play in. I don't know how to do that. I know that old games did that. I know that I've played with projects myself to try and do that. I know that it's necessary. I wonder what other features should be added, right, into the way these operate, right? So that it can be a glitch or something coming in, or a sense of time, or a sense of invasion, or I think Marx had this term, submersion, that one thing could be submerged slowly in another. I just had all these, I've always been dreaming of something like that. I tried to get a student was once years ago building an evil parking structure where every 5 minutes your car would move and a virus would be eating up the structure unless you move fast enough. And then it was hired by Google, and that was the end of it. But I've still been waiting almost very patiently for the inevitable, that these have to be time-based. And I don't know how else to be time-based except in the way of playing, you know, with narrative. So I don't know how to do it. But I know it's where their work is heading. All this work is heading, because if it's just a frozen in time, you know, we know that the future ages faster than the present. So there's no way to do that unless you have some factor. It'd be interesting to figure out how that would be played with. I don't expect an answer. I'll just leave that as a thought. But if there is an answer, I'd be amazed. But I think it's going to happen. I think the whole visual podcasting is heading in that direction. But my daughter-in-law is getting paid more money than I get paid just to look for it, for Spotify, how to make a narrative element work. It's very clear. It's not about fact or fiction. It's about the dynamic of time.
That seems like a good question for Evan Stalker.
Oh,
I'm just feeling like there's a lot that you were discussing that we see resonating in his project in terms of, references to historical moments, but also, interrogating what the current moment is in anticipation of what's to come.
Anticipation is part of it, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, Evan, is there anything you'd like to say in response to that? Putting you on the spot here, sorry.
No, not to put you on the spot, but just to begin a conversation that will happen. There's no doubt. I can see it coming.
Yeah.
Sure. No, thank you. Always appreciate hearing your thoughts, Norman, on work. I think, I think the way that you identify time and the way that interaction design really can get into modifying routines and then sort of creating these differences in the world that we understand in temporal ways. That was something I thought a lot about, and Elizabeth Freeman's work in Time Binds was a huge influence ultimately on what I did. One of the interesting things about Time Binds is that it goes back to that moment, the sort of Gilbreth's Taylorist moment, and traces the way that influenced kitchen design, and the way that embedded it was this confluence of misogyny and capitalism should be completely clear, and then that kind of also then shaped this idea of the family and the household that becomes this thing that queer life and then queer history is kind of to use, Sarah Ahmed's language and queer phenomenology, sort of orienting against, away from, around. I think you can sort of, the topology there is complex. But yeah, I think that looking at, I think using a temporal lens is a great way to kind of understand, especially as technology becomes so much more about routine, right? As it becomes things become even more dematerialized. I think sort of as a designer thinking about the work that you do temporally and in this sort of lived time sense, in the way of routine and looking at, work in anthropology, there's so much of this. There's this amazing book. Oh my God, I can't believe I forget it. But of course
you do right now.
Of course I do right now. But it has it's a study of a lot of different groups of people, and it builds on Doreen Massey's sort of geographical conception of power and then temporalizes it. And then what the author ends up doing with that is looking at a number of situations where she argues that people are giving and taking time. There are these imbalances of power that are playing out through the ways that people think about time. And I'll just end with this quick example. Her first study is about cab drivers in a Canadian city that I cannot remember, let's say Toronto. Many of them are immigrants and are working towards a more permanent status and are in these transitional positions, and many of their clients, and even some of the clients they hope to get, right? Because business travelers can end up being very regular clients for cab drivers, are these traveling road warriors. And the ethnography traces across from, it does a profile of this sort of mid-2000s road warrior, accelerationist business culture, that ideology and the way that time figures in there. And then, shifts to the lived experience of these cab drivers. Sarah Sharma, that's who it is, Sarah Sharma. It's Sarah Sharma's book. And what Sharma, it's funny that it feels like it's a real grad school moment that as you get into that rhythm where you're going to say someone's last name, you remember it. But Sharma, what she does is it looks at this moment where business travelers get into the cab and the cab drivers feel like they need to make time. They're being asked to produce time. And as she looks at this difference where there's this ideology of acceleration and fastness, And then this other rhythm of sort of being like out of the loop of capitalism, which is neither fast nor slow. But that to me was really fascinating. So I would put that forward as an example of, you know, as sort of like time craft that I would love to see an interaction design. And I think, yeah, I mean, Keisuke's piece is sort of starting to get at that as well. That's my response.
Yeah,
that sounds great. I wanted to just add one thing. Martha Rossler's work, Semiotics of the Kitchen, might be fun to look at, because it was a whole crisis between broadcast time and video art time. And maybe there's something, you know, in the germ of all of that. It was never, it's a very, very funny piece. You maybe know it, but there might be something in that 70s struggle, right? About time that would fit, since it's the kitchen at least. I'll stop. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Norman. Thank you, Evan. I want to just pose a quick question to the graduating students. If it's likely that Emily and Stuart will watch this, and is there anything you'd like to say to them in response to their videos?
I really appreciated her comment on as moving forward, understanding or evolving the process more, because that's something that I'm thinking more so now that I have a piece that like can start a conversation about what it could be, than now going back and focusing more on the process. I really appreciated that. But I think overall, I really want to thank for being so gentle with all of us. I think we all really needed that, especially right now. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, anybody else?
Yeah, I would second Aishwarya's thank you, just for taking the time to do that, and also the bit that I sent Stuart was not the exact presentation that I gave today, but he seemed to kind of predict what I would, you know, identify as that important thing to share with you all, being the conversation. So I thought, you know, he did a good job of future predicting there. Yeah, exactly, Sean.
That's good. What's Sean say? Speaking from the future, yeah. Okay, Elise has her hand up.
Thanks, Anne. I just wanted to continue a little bit of, you know, where I think the previous conversation was going in terms of time. And I saw Mike also mentioning in chat about sort of like, okay, how about seeing the local times for everyone who's in a Zoom webinar or meeting, for instance. And I think it definitely makes me reflect. I mean, I think for me, that has such a strong tie to just the experience of the past year. I feel like I definitely have a sense of Zoom time versus other kinds of time, but also even the things that are outside of Zoom. There's been such a different rhythm to life. And I guess a question again for all of the thesis grads is how, yeah, what has that impact been like for you? A year ago, was the genesis of Thesis Live, but it was still so fresh into that kind of existence. And I think we've been in it for a year, for more than a year. And I'm just really curious, how has your practice shifted? And how specific to the pandemic and the conditions of the past year do you feel your work is, even if not explicit about it?
Yeah, please feel free to just simply unmute. You don't have to raise your hand to respond to Elise's question.
I feel like when the pandemic hit, I feel like it dismantled a lot of my processes and how I work in general, you know, and I think it took some time to kind of start to situate myself every day and like how do I work again? And I think that was very difficult for me. And, you know, all of a sudden changing environments and just being in the house every day, kind of like, you know, there's no new experiences being created, no new memories, etc. And I think that really, you know, impacted me, you know, both mentally and physically in general. So I had to kind of like create some kind of routine of like working out, going out as best I can, but then at the same time start to reconstruct it through the digital world, going, okay, now how do I bring this all into the digital world, and what can I use, what can't I do? Like I'm more hands-on, you know, I used to be more, so now I've really shifted a lot of what I do to online. I mean, you know, it's no problem. I learn and I had to adapt, and I think I was being very open-minded in this whole thing and very flexible to like the situation. So I think that's how I've, if anything, if I reflect back, you know, and not only that, but introspectively, I think I don't know. I think the pandemic has forced me really to kind of like go even deeper inside and kind of, you know, rethink a lot of things. And I think there's some, you know, the positives and negatives in that. A lot of it's heavy, but coming out of it, I feel like, you know, I have, you know, resurfaced a lot of parts of me that I lost for some time, but I'm happy in general.
Thanks, Keisuke. Maggie's got her hand up.
Yeah, and the moment may have passed actually, because it was more around Stuart and Emily, so people don't mind me jumping back to what we'd want to say to them. I want to say thank you. I thought their insights into some of the through lines that kind of propel MDP were really, really fast, like really quick read and very intuitive. Like, what is the role of design? How do we make futures come to life through design? What else did I hear? I actually took some notes. If we can make something, what should we make? Experiential scenarios, what do they tell us about the world now? And mostly, how do we just, and that's what I think was really the critical part that I heard today, that's really hard, right? And I think Stuart said it when he said, some certain aspects are like a conversation, or they're gestural towards something, and they're critical and they're discursive, but are they speculative? And I heard in his comments, viable, and what components of it are viable. And I think there's a through line there to, well, what do we do next? And the two things then I wrote down that I heard from Emily was really language. I thought I heard her talk about language and how certain words both anchored and structured, and then how viability also helps us discern what components of our speculation are truly generative, not just narrative, not just a fiction, right? And I just took that away as being really important. And I don't know if that kind of takes us away from the conversation about how our work has changed over the last year. But something I notice is that there is a specificity required of being online, of being in our little cubes, of making video, of presenting, that really demands a lot about our language, and also the engagement of others, rather than expressing what we think is important, imagining how that communication platform creates meaning for others. So those were the two thoughts that I've been jumping around in my mind. So I guess my question for students is, what are the terms or the concepts that you think you're going to bring forward, and what aspects in the breadth of all of your work do you think is most valuable? I guess they were the two, out of all of that, were the two questions, or the two components to a question. What are the words and concepts in language, and what are the components of your work that you think are most valuable, and why?
Those strike me as really crucial kinds of questions going forward. Mike Milley, you have your hand up, and Norman's after you.
Maybe to bridge a little bit of Elise's question and Maggie's comment, I'm curious if the students have any thoughts. We've talked a lot, everyone has talked a lot over the past 12 months about what we've lost by being isolated, by what we've sort of left behind in being together. And I'm wondering if for any of you, you felt like your practice evolved over the past year because of the weird circumstances that we found ourselves in. Have you, as designers being confronted with this moment, found any sort of benefits or advancement or kind of weird pandemic bonus that maybe wouldn't have happened if we'd all been in Pasadena together?
I loved doing my thesis remotely. Like it wasn't a con for me at all. I don't know if that's what you were expecting, Mike, but for me personally, it forced me to, I really like to work with lots of different types of people, and being in the studio and having access to all of the tools and technologies, there's almost this need to do all of it yourself. Like, oh, we have a sewing studio, so I should sew literally every piece that I'm making, versus I created for my prototypes, I created lots of different prototypes that were like glued together and paper. And then I had someone who was a much better seamstress than I finish off the like defining aspects of my project, so it looked more perfect. And if I had had a sewing machine, it may have been crap, because I would have felt this strong desire to do it all of myself. And I think this really makes or forces you to be like, what am I actually good at? And how do I find the places where people are better than me? And so for me, the pandemic was like kind of great in terms of thesis, no other way. But I think maybe that answers your question a little bit.
Okay, Norman, you've got your hand raised.
Well, just as an observation that's haunting me, and it's inevitably going to happen, speaking as an historian, it's pretty clear that we've been waiting for the 21st century to finally land. We thought Trump would bring it, but then we didn't realize that everyone's Trump and he's just a caricature. We thought we've been waiting and waiting, and of all things, just sitting in our little shoeboxes for the last year and watching the world seem to stand still. This is actually going to be probably the transitional moment for an incredibly different era. So I keep thinking, what could it be different? It's going to be similar or not. So the work that we're seeing has that sense of pause about it. But and we'll remember this pause, but there's so many signals that indicate that we are heading into something different enough that it will be the measure, right, of part of our lives. And it's hard to get that because here we are, you know what I mean, just staring at each other in our shoeboxes. I thought I'd just pass that along so a year from now we could talk about it more, or something like that. But it's very clear that, strangely enough, this weird stillness is really the beginning of an entirely new moment. And I wonder what that moment will be. I'm afraid we're stuck inside wondering. I wonder what Anne thinks of that.
Yeah, well, so I don't know. It's
You feel it too?
Yeah, I absolutely 100% feel it. Yeah. Well, it's a strange question because at the moment, Tim and Elise and I are in a studio on campus that has all the projects from the last class that Tim and I finished with the students last March sitting all around us. And we are in this strange moment of, it's like looking at Chernobyl, photos from Chernobyl a little bit. And so I feel like we're in this very strange in-between zone of transition. Yeah.
I often, okay, you gotta go.
No, I hear the music coming up.
You know that you're in history when you're living in history, when every day feels like a month. So see the laugh, right?
Or you're, smoking weed, but
but it's not legal to do that. You can pipe it through.
And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elise for our concluding remarks.
Thanks, Anne. I just wanted to keep an eye on the time. We're coming up on 5:30. And so I think, of course, within MDP, the discussion always continues. But we're also we just want to thank everyone who joined in the audience on Zoom and also on YouTube if you're tuning in. I think we're going to go ahead and stop the recording. We're stopping the streaming now, or at least in a couple of moments. And so you can be free to unleash yourselves, Thesis, to celebrate, this amazing work. I know we all feel really proud of the work that you've shown today. And with that, I guess.
Yeah. And thank you to the people on YouTube who have joined us.
Congratulations.
But students and faculty, please stick around. This concludes our live public component, and we're going to have the after party. Okay.
Tim Durfee's background.
Kevin, have we cut the feed to YouTube?
Maybe. Hold on.
No, we're still live. Don't unleash yourself yet. Keep it just barely in check.
Rachel started the party already. Oh, Tim is going for it.
Tim's got it.